Calling to order the Town Finance Community Housing Oversight Committee meeting of Monday, January 13th. And as a reminder, this meeting is being broadcast to the town's YouTube channel and also via Zoom. And is being recorded for publication, later viewing, and administrative purposes. I assume the Needham Observer is recording. And if anybody else wanted to record, I'd like to know. Any other recordings? No? Okay, great. I guess we'll start with public comment.
No hands.
No hands? Okay. All right, so first on the agenda then is the approval of the December 9th minutes.
I move their acceptance.
Discussion?
I'll second.
No discussion? Everybody okay with the minutes? All right, then we'll take a vote. John?
Yes.
Rick?
Aye.
Rhonda?
Yes.
Denise?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Okay, so that moves us to the second item in the agenda, the letter summarizing the committee's work. And I think you all got from Katie a draft letter for this year, and then in the packet was last year's letter. So I will open it up to discussion, either comments on what Katie has, as well as there's a sort of blank spot for us to fill in as well.
So one thing that I thought we might want to consider is in our prior year's letter under recommendations, we made some recommendations about conditions of the grant that we may want to consider including. And I would say that those would be applicable to both applications seeking community housing funding. So that would be for Charles River Center and for the Housing Authority with respect to its seabeds and Robert Cook Drive application. So we could refer, if you could kind of refer back to it, and I think I would look for kind of similar conditions. With the caveat too that's included in the footnote, which is that like last year, this year, there's a consultant on board assisting the CPC in analyzing both of these grant requests. And so the consultant may have conditions of the grant. I think that would be part of the charge of the consultant. That would be included in the grant.
Can I just direct everybody's attention to the packet, page 11? Just to follow.
All right, I apologize
Peter
for not correcting.
saying. Which I think is in the online. Is it in the? It's in the online packet that we got via email. Page 11.
I just like to finish with my comments. I jumped to the end because there are a couple of other bullet points under recommendations, which I think would be applicable. The kind of language that we agreed on last year on any kind of grant like this. One being that the CPA funds would be committed to, as the case may be, the Housing Authority or Charles River Center only after the financial closing of the project if 100% of the financing is secured. That was the last bullet point under recommendations. I'm working backwards and I really apologize for that. And prior to that is another bullet point, which I think is worth, we can probably discuss it, which is this statement that town support is critical to the securing funding through the Massachusetts Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. I think that that's a representation that's made in the Charles River application this year, because they're seeking housing tax credits, and so one of the measures that the state looks at is whether or not there's local community support, and that's one of the reasons why Charles River is making this application. And so I'm gonna leave it up to the committee to decide that, but that's a representation that we made in our prior year. And seems to make sense to include it in this as well. And then the other question that I have is, do we want to, it seems to me that we can make a representation that the housing authority has made measurable progress on the project goals. I mean, we've gotten various reports from them. They've drawn down on the various grants. And I think it's fair to the housing authority and to the process to make some representation about whether or not they're getting anywhere. It looks like they are. So those would be my comments.
So Chair, through you. So just to comment on each one of us. So on the first one about we have to prove that 100% of the money's been secured. That is assuming that our money is secure, right? You know, we're not setting up a failure model here where we don't give them our money so they can never have 100%. I just want the language to be really clear on that.
Yeah, I think that we can borrow the language from last year, but sure.
Okay, well, I'd like to review language. I don't have that language in front of me.
Okay.
And I'd like to not vote on this until I have that language in front of me. The second thing is, when we're saying local community support, I think we need to define what that is. I think if the CPA has voted money, that's local community support, and town meeting votes it, I think that's local community support. I think, we are in the middle of a very gray area tonight around community support, so I would like to clarify that very clearly, and for me, it is those two things: the CPA has voted it, town meeting has approved it, constitutes local community support. And I guess the third thing is unmeasurable progress. I have been thinking about this and don't know quite how to articulate this, but we are responsible for the town money in the major project, right? I'm just hoping we think about what the boundaries are around that for a whole project moving forward. Like for $5 million, we can't control a $58 million project. So I'm just kind of thinking about that, but I'm not far enough down the road. But I have been trying to get that straight, and I was hoping maybe I could meet separately and offline and better understand that.
Can I speak to that? Because I think that's one of the issues that we kind of struggle with, right? Which is we have a little piece of this. We're not like we're not a upfront public building committee. So we always struggle with that, and we usually go back to the charge on that. But I understand your concern, but I think we kind of rely a little bit on what our charge is. I understand your concern. But I do think, I guess we'll have to go back and look, and I thought tonight was kind of a working session, right? Because we're not gonna finalize this until our next meeting.
Correct. This is
So-
the first review of the draft and to get your major thoughts
So this is
on,
kind of a thought.
and then
So-
we can do the final wordsmithing at the next meeting. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Other comments? I mean, I think on the point of making progress, one of the thoughts that I had was that I think the earlier part of the letter does outline a lot of the progress.
Right.
So to some extent, I don't know if we need to characterize it. The facts are listed there of, you know, in particular, meeting the milestone of submitting the pre-application in November. But all the things that led up to that, so.
So when I'm looking at this, I'm very comfortable with the language that talks about meeting the progress that we presently have in the letter. I didn't know if we were seeking somehow deeper or more granular information.
I don't know, I guess that's a discussion point.
The bullet points that I put in for project status, my intent was just to say factually, like, what have we heard from NHA and their development partners on where they are? The observations and recommendations section of the letter, I think, really is, now that you've synthesized and heard all of that, is there anything you would want town meeting, select board, finance committee to know about the process we've run over the last year, or anything that they wouldn't understand just from knowing the facts of the current project status? So it may be that you don't feel like you want to add much. I really would defer to the committee. But if there, it's really the time to say, any color to how you feel like this process has gone, or, accolades on progress, or if there's anything that you think warrants a cautionary note, and obviously there may be nothing.
Does that evoke any ideas?
I'm comfortable with the way you have it.
I thought the letter was very factual and to the point. And
The only,
well done.
I'm sorry, Rhonda.
That was all I had to say.
Yeah, the only comment I was gonna have is that if any of the other boards or groups had provided us with any feedback based on the first report, is there anything there that we should be just incorporating into this report for this year?
Nothing comes to mind, Rick. I'm trying to think if
Okay,
we've
then-
heard back from any of the other boards.
Yeah, then I just leave it as it is then, that's fine.
Yeah. I think if anything, the other boards took this letter into consideration when heading into Maytown meeting last year, when they were voting on the 5.5 million.
Yeah,
I mean, I think we could include, however, some of the stuff Peter's mentioning about the conditions. I mean, we don't know what CPC may approve, so obviously we have uncertainty about that, but some of the things about meeting regularly and getting copies of agreements, some of those things do seem like they would be pretty standard. I don't know, it feels a little early when we don't, this was later in the process, right, where we already had a CPC approved project that, we didn't know initially whether it'd be approved by town meeting, then it was approved by town meeting, but it was a little later in the process, but I do think, Peter's point is well taken, that these are things that we would want as an agreement to work with anyone,
Right.
Just as a,
But the paragraph from last year begins with, if the Community Preservation Committee recommends.
oh, that's
So
just, I have it,
it's
Yeah.
really in the event of.
that's true.
So I just want to make,
Yeah.
also want to make that clear, which is we're not weighing in on what the CPC should be doing in
Mhm.
terms of these grant requests. What we're saying is, in the event that they are allowed, we think that they should include the following things.
Right, if they
And-
approve either of the pending.
And you're right,
Yeah.
though, it's early in the process, so we don't have a real good grasp on what granular we may want on a grant agreement. But then again, and that's not, there are plenty of people who are involved in that. We've got a consultant, we've got CPC, we've got the select board. Last year, we had finance committee. So everyone was weighing in up until the final vote on what those, conditions of the grant would be. So I don't think it's critical that we have them in a final form, but we could say them in general terms,
Mhm.
Makes sense.
What do other people think?
I think I said before, I'm good with how it is.
John, does that mean are you saying without what my recommendations or what I had said? I was unclear about, that's all. I don't care.
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel strongly about your recommendations, but I don't stand in the way of them.
Okay, so you are good with the draft as is. We don't need to put any additions in.
That's where I would stand, yes.
I was just trying to unpack that, that's all. That's fine. Got it.
And I would agree with that as well.
You agree to that?
Is there any uncertainty? There's only a little bit of a mention of the EOHLC. Given the vote tomorrow and all that's been going on with that, is there any uncertainty around that funding that we should wait to mention, or is that a separate process?
I have to assume if we have to, we'll go back to town meeting and do what we had, which is not unanimously vote the base plan.
I just wasn't sure if the mention of state funding would shift at all, sort of
Yeah.
depending on tomorrow. But
I guess what I would say to greatly oversimplify everything
Yeah.
is until they get the money, they don't have the money, you know, so.
That's a
And-
good
and
summary.
I think we'll know a lot more by the February 10th meeting.
Right,
On
right,
the,
yeah.
on the MBTA Communities Act front, so it's a little bit,
Yeah.
Yeah,
timelines going in fits and starts.
But the issue with the money is not in February. We're gonna know when we get invited in. I'm sure we're getting an update from Reg on where we are with applying for the funds, but I think there's little risk that the town agreed to a plan that would allow us to get funding. So I think it'd be hard to imagine that we won't continue to agree to a plan that allows us to get the funding.
So as for me, I'm perfectly willing to operate on a consensus basis of the letter. Let's say I raise those as ideas. If people don't think that it's worth the ink on the paper, and that's fine. We'll just, less is better.
So not carrying forward.
Unless anyone else feels strongly about it. Looks like everyone else feels comfortable with the letter as is without any recommendations or observations to the town side. I'm just interpreting that.
Agreed.
I mean, I think one way to look at that, and yes, it is language for the grant agreement, but also it's a way, it's sort of the way we're operating as a committee. So, you know, the idea that if the town decides to spend money on housing and we have oversight, that we would regularly meet, you know, with the body, and we would get these kinds of updates. And I think perhaps, and again, I'll throw it to the committee, that's now understood as a standard operating procedure. And if a project is funded, selected, then obviously we, you know, maybe we would weigh in more specifically then, if there was anything specific. I don't know, you know. That makes sense to others.
That's fine.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
Any other thoughts on the letter? Any other guidance to give Katie as she thinks about redrafting? I know there's some in here that you said are bullets that you'll turn into text.
Yeah.
But any other guidance for Katie?
Not for me. I thought it was good.
Okay, I'll get the updated draft back out to folks, because we will need to finalize it at your next meeting, so.
Perfect.
Great.
Thank
I
you.
have
Well,
I had gone through some little nits and nats.
Yeah, do you want to email me for headlines? Yeah, great.
Before we launch into the next thing, I just want to mention I have to leave in about 15 minutes, so I'm sorry, I apologize ahead of time, but I just wanted to mention it. Because I can't find the chat to just put it in chat.
Thank you,
We
Rhonda.
disable it.
Okay, so next, update on Community Preservation Committee grant application process.
Yes, I just wanted to keep folks oriented since we have kind of these parallel committee tracks going. Cecilia and I caught up with Lauren Spinney, who is the staff assigned to the Community Preservation Act committee. So as you know, they received due diligence responses back on all their applications, including the 3 housing ones. I shared those with all of you via email. I do want to note at our last meeting, I had shared the application for the Needham Housing Authority, Seabeds, Captain Robert Cook construction project, and I had shared the Charles River Center. At the time, I had not shared the Housing Authority's request for the High Rock land use study, $150,000. I thought that it had been deemed ineligible, but the committee has chosen to continue the vetting process of that as a final determination is made on eligibility. So that's now why you see 3 instead of 2. And that $150,000 in the application is for them to hire a consultant to run the community process and the study to determine what options for redevelopment would be at High Rock. So as Peter mentioned, the CPC did retain a housing financing consultant. Again, they went with the same consultant, Emily Achtenberg, as previously used last year. She will be taking a look at the Housing Authority and the Charles River Center applications and helping CPC as they go through the vetting process and answering their questions. If anyone is interested, right now, the presentations by the applicants are scheduled for February 5th is the Housing Authority, and February 12th is Charles River Center. And those will be noticed on the town website. They run hybrid meetings. And then lastly, we're meeting on the 10th to finalize this letter. The CPC will be consulting with the select board February 25th and the finance committee right around end of February as well. And then CPC will make their final decisions in March as we head to a final warrant for May town meeting.
So I just had a question, if this is appropriate. I'm interested in how much money, knowing that the housing bucket isn't the only way that we can fund housing, but how much money is in the housing bucket and what we project year after year will be going into that. And we may not have that number tonight, but I'm very interested in that number.
Cecilia, do you have that number?
It's not the exact number, but right now it's about 800,000. And they have in the last few years now allocated 22% of the CPA bucket in order to housing instead of the 10%. And I anticipate that continuing. So around the same amount would go in depending on what their local receipts are every year.
Okay, and how much is the actual present balance?
800 and change thousand.
I'm sorry, then how much do you anticipate we get year over year? The money that gets transferred into the CPA housing bucket?
It's been between 700 and 900,000 a
Okay, so
year for the last
700.
couple of years now. They used all of it in last May town meeting, so the balance was 0 until that 800,000-ish when it went back in. I can get the exact number for you all.
And again, maybe this is a little bit outside of scope, but just if we're talking about the CPC process, to the extent to which there are grant requests that exceed their housing balance, does that mean they can't do them, or how would they do them?
So they can use money from the general reserve and from the CPA free cash for any of the eligible projects. So that would be where any additional money above that would be coming from. But those are the only 2 other funding sources.
But the housing money has to be used for housing.
Yes.
Just add to the CPC in their application and their due diligence follow-up, they asked the applicants to chunk the money out by fiscal year that they think they would need it. And I believe the consultant has been asked to look at what if the funding needed to be phased.
Mhm.
Now, that's challenging for, cobbling together the whole stack, but it's indicative that the committee is going to be looking at how do you vet these projects when you don't have money to fund all of them at the applied requested amount.
Any other discussion?
When we did this building, right, we bonded the money. Okay, how did that actually work?
I'm gonna look at Dave.
There was a significant portion, the portion that was eligible, considered historic preservation, restoration. That portion was funded by CPA funds, to which most of it was financed by debt. That is not an option. The town cannot issue bonds for another entity. The Needham Housing Authority has to stand on its own.
we cannot issue it for another entity while we have the current bond, or we cannot do
No.
it in general.
We can't do it in general. The town of Needham is not the Needham Housing Authority,
Okay,
and we can't issue bonds in the name of the Needham Housing Authority.
okay.
It's a separate, different entity.
So how did we do this building then?
Well, this is Town Hall, which belongs to the town of Needham.
Oh,
and
you're
the-
saying, so the CPA money is town of Needham money,
Correct,
but the projects themselves are not town of Needham.
correct.
Okay,
Any other discussion on the CPC grant update?
I have one other question then, and please, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Can the CPC bond money, they are the town of Needham.
CPC has no legal right to issue bonds. Only the select board has the authority to issue bonds upon a vote at town meeting.
Other discussion? All right, well, we'll move to the update on the Needham Housing Authority.
I was not expecting Reg, so I'll share what I was going to, but if.
I'm not here.
Yeah, okay. So just to say on the Linden redevelopment project, there was a request from the Housing Authority to the town for us to advance some pending items that help them get prepared for a full application to HLC in February if invited. And so the select board voted to waive building permit fees when this project gets to that point. And we're actively working on following up on the town meeting vote to clean up some of the historical deed restrictions that had been in place. We're working on an update to a historical pilot agreement for that site, and we are also working on finalizing the CPA agreement for that 5.5 million. So it's just kind of the residual administrative work that we're actively working with the Housing Authority. And hopefully to finalize all of those before their final HOC application in February.
And February on what date?
The application is due the 27th.
27th, and this is not automatic if you've done the pre-application?
You have to be
It's-
invited
you
to
have be invited, so it's a
advance.
selection.
So the HOC does an initial meeting.
Hmm?
HOC does an initial meeting of applications that came in the fall.
But we sort of have a vote tomorrow, so that I'm hoping, we don't know, but we haven't heard yet. Usually you have it heard by now if you're invited into the final round.
That was all I had.
Reg, would you add anything?
Nope, got it all.
Questions? Well, just a reminder to everyone that we have a meeting on February 10th here, and we will go over we'll try to finalize our letter. And I guess, well, maybe we'll know something more from HLC for that, right? Guess if there's no further discussion, I'd welcome a motion.
So I moved to adjourn.
Seconded.
We'll come to a vote then. John,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Rhonda? Avery?
Yes.
Denise? Yes. Peter?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So we are adjourned. See everybody February 10th.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.